There is another issue that occurs on a regular basis when using an ORM, and that is the N+1 selects issue. So what do we mean by this? In looking at the code that you see on the screen, we're using Entity Framework to first load a student. And then we're loading all of the courses that that student has completed and calculating their GPA. That's what this code does down here. In order to do this though, we have to get some data from some other tables. One table is the course enrollments table that stores the courses that the student took and their grades. We also have to query the courses table because we need to determine how many credits each course is worth. And on the way to get the course data, we also end up having to query the course offerings table because this is the table that links the course enrollments and courses table. By default, Entity Framework will lazy load all of this data. That is, it will only load the data when it's needed. And in this case, that works against us. What happens here is that Entity Framework gets all the student data, and that's one query. Then, to get the course enrollment data, that is a second query. But when we start looping over all of these course enrollment records, and we get to this line here, Entity Framework is going to have to lazy load the course data. So it's going to issue a query for each course offering record and then for each course record, and it's going to do that each time it goes through the loop. In this case, the student has completed 40 courses at our university, so what happens here is that Entity Framework is going to actually run 80 queries inside of this loop. And then on top of this, there actually are 3 more queries that get run to get the data out of the grades table. So this relatively simple looking loop is issuing a total of 85 queries. And even though these queries are all very small and simple, just the chattiness of all the back and forth between the application and the database is not going to result in very good performance. I do want to point out that this issue is not unique to Entity Framework. It can occur anytime we have lazy loading like this going on. So if you're using Hibernate or another ORM, you're still susceptible to this problem. Let's run this program real quick, and we'll be able to actually see all of these queries in Oracle. Okay, now let's head over to SQL Developer. And I should tell you that before I started this demo, I did clear out the shared SQL area so that only the queries from this application would be in the cache. And also, the reason that I have all these where clauses in this query is that in the background, the ODP.NET driver and Oracle are exchanging some information, and I want to filter all of that out so we can get down and just see the queries that our application's running. So let's do that. So here we are, and we can see indeed that we're hitting the database 80 plus times. And we see a couple of these queries being run 40 times each. Again, all these queries individually are very fast, but the problem is the number of these queries. If we could run just one query, well, even though that query would be a little bit more complex, that would result in better performance because we'd get rid of all this back and forth that's going on between our application and our database. So let's see how we do that. In Entity Framework, we can specify that we want data to be loaded up front or eagerly loaded. And to do that, we use an include in our link queries. And now, what Entity Framework is going to do is it's going to issue one query to get all of the course information. And that's going to join all these tables together, the course enrollments, the course offerings, the courses table, and the grades table. So we're going to see that we get rid of a lot of queries. So let's go ahead and run this again, and we'll demonstrate that. Before we run it, though, we'll go over and we'll clear out our shared SQL area again so we're starting fresh. There we go. And now we will run this again. We get the same answer for GPA, which is always a good start. And if we go back to SQL Developer, and so now we see we're issuing just one query, so this should be an improvement over what we had before. We can copy this query out here and look at it, and we will see that this is a more complex query. But still, we're going to be doing a much better job because we don't have all that back and forth of the 85 queries that we had before. So what you want to remember is that you want to be aware of the implications of lazy loading. A lot of times, lazy loading is a big benefit because it keeps us from loading a bunch of data that we never intend to use. But there are a few scenarios like this one where it can work against us. So you want to recognize these situations like this where you're looping over a bunch of objects that are going to be lazy loaded, and then see if you can instruct your ORM to use eager loading to load all that data up front, because this is going to yield better performance.